This is Indian Standard Time on Avaz South Asia. I'm Nirupama Subramanian, and with me today is Professor Amitabh Mattoo, and we are here to discuss the Supreme Court's verdict on the abrogation of Article 370, which was done by the government in August 2019. The Supreme Court has upheld that move, and Professor Amitabh Mattoo, who teaches at JNU, has links to Kashmir, has continuing links to Kashmir. He has been in the government in Kashmir. He has been part of Mehbooba Mufti's government as a special advisor, and he's one of the best persons to talk about this. Welcome to Indian Standard Time and Avaz South Asia, Dr. Mattoo. My first question to you is, what are your first thoughts on this verdict? Were you expecting anything different?
I don't think I was surprised. I think everyone who follows the political developments in J&K, as well as the legal arguments behind the abrogation of 370 and the manner in which both sides presented their case before the Honorable Supreme Court, would have been clear that the judgment would hold up the constitutional validity of the decision made by the central government and the Indian Parliament in abrogating Article 370. In fact, I haven't read the judgments, but what I heard is that someone who I know well, that Justice Sanjay calls parallel judgment, which concurs with it's a unanimous judgment, but there are kind of parallel asides as well, has a very deeply reflective and introspective view of developments and talks about the future. Frankly speaking, I would rather now look forward, because it was clear that the clock cannot be put behind us. We cannot wind the clock back. It was also clear that Article 370 was really symbolic in nature. It had lost its substantive merit long ago. What the Supreme Court has said that the state did not have any internal sovereignty. It had surrendered all sovereignty through the instrument of accession. The 370 was a temporary and transitional article inserted for the purposes of deciding what subjects would be covered, and because there was a war zone in the state.
That's right.
We all know, however, that there is a certain emotional attachment to 370, which was obtained by the fact that Jammu and Kashmir thought of itself as special. I think what Justice Sanjay Kaul and others have said is that you need to restore the statehood of J&K. It no longer should be a union territory. Election should be held before the end of September. And more importantly, and that I think Justice Kaul has done remarkably well to include that in his judgment, is that talked about a Truth and Reconciliation Commission.
Yes, that's
because
very interesting intervention, isn't it? A Truth and Reconciliation Commission on the lines of what obtained in South Africa. What purpose might that serve? Would that be to heal the wounds in Kashmir on all sides?
That is the expectation, that this is not a criminal court to indict people, but it gives a collective opportunity of truth-telling, to use Justice Sanjay Kaul's own words, that there is a history of grievances, victimhood, human rights abuses, which have gone either unrecorded or unheard. A forum like this would provide people, at the very least, a sense of catharsis. And at a much greater level, would lead to the process of reconciliation, real reconciliation on the ground, so that even those who have had to leave Jammu and Kashmir, like members of my own Kashmiri Pandit community, would be able to return with dignity. But Truth and Reconciliation really begins in the hearts and minds of people. So hopefully the constitutional debate being settled, we can begin talking about the politics, grassroots democracy, return to statehood, and a genuine redressal of grievances through a mechanism like this. That's the expectation.
It's interesting you talk about returning to grassroots democracy and politics. The first reactions from the politicians in the state, Omar Abdullah and Sajjad Lone, they say that they are very disappointed and that they will continue to struggle, and that the sentiments of the people have not been taken into account, is broadly what they are both saying. We haven't had a reaction from the former Chief Minister Mehbooba Mufti yet. But your first thoughts on that, on the political reaction?
Politicians, without any disrespect to the people that you mentioned, politicians need to grandstand, especially at moments like this. Academics in some ways, to use the metaphor of truth telling again, need to be honest. Frankly speaking, I think no one, not even Kapil Sibal, who I think even before the judgment was pronounced, said that some battles are fought even though you know you might lose them, but it's worth fighting that battle. It was a battle worth fighting because, in some ways, uh, right-wing government was seen as having abrogated 370. But now that you have the Supreme Court's endorsement, and every single party, mainstream party in JNK had said, look, we await the judgment of the Supreme Court. Now that the Supreme Court has given that judgment, and I imagine that there is a recourse possible to appeals, but let's temporarily put this to a closure and focus on the politics. After all, 370 and everything else is about democracy, empowerment, politics, good governance. That's what we should focus on. That's what politicians should focus on. Of course, I think for a couple of days you should allow them the freedom, or at least the latitude, to be able to not completely do a U-turn, because that would require a act of such great statesmanship that it's not always easy to do this in unusual circumstances. But beyond the grandstanding, I think we need to now look into our hearts, every Kashmiri, every Indian. What can we do to heal the wounds? Can we do to empower all those in Jammu and Kashmir who have felt marginalized, alienated, disempowered, those who have been victims of violence? I would say this is the Supreme Court judgment and Justice Call's. I'm repeating Justice Call because Justice Call and I have a similar history of belonging to Kashmir, with a deep heritage, and he is someone I know whose voice I respect. But he has actually, in some ways, touched on the most sensitive part, the grievances, the violence, the anger. 370 restoration would do nothing to restore or put balm on the feeling of those who have really been hurt during these years of violence. What was it for? We need to now go back, ask ourselves that question, and create forums where people can express themselves. I know there have been multiple attempts made at dialogue and reconciliation. Ms. Subramaniam, you were part of some of these efforts. But when there is state patronage, can often act as a spoiler. But sometimes you need state patronage, or especially if it's at the directions or the advice of the Supreme Court, to be able to create a forum which is legitimate, where people can express themselves without fear and frankly.
So you spoke about grandstanding. Why do they need to grandstand? I mean, obviously, there is a sentiment on the ground for even the symbolic value of Article 370, that feeling of specialness that it imparted to Kashmir. And obviously, it's still there. That is why probably the need to, as you call it, grandstand, and not immediately concur with or accept what the Supreme Court is saying. Would you agree that sentiment is there, and it is a strong sentiment on a public sentiment?
It's been part of the dominant discourse. What I'm suggesting is that the discourse now needs to shift, but it cannot happen automatically, and it cannot happen immediately. And that's why politicians, being really a reader of public opinion, or having their pulse on the public opinion, will know that it's risky to move away from what a position that they took before the judgment was announced immediately, given the expectations that there were. But when you now change the discourse from 370 to a discourse based on rights, on people who, on elections, on human rights abuses, that's the discourse which will actually match the feelings, real core of the feelings of the most of the people of the state, of this union territory, and soon I hope to be restored as a state.
And the fact that they have been put under virtual house arrest, it's not called house arrest, but their gates have been locked, and they've prevented the political leaders from coming out. What is the fear even now that they have to remain, that the administration has to prevent or restrict their movements?
Since 2019, I think the state has taken a view that they need to actually exercise force and preventive measures, perhaps in excess of the situation on the ground. And obviously, that has attracted a certain degree of criticism. On the other hand, they would say that has prevented violence and killings on the streets.
So how long can they continue to keep this suppressed, this sentiment? Or
what I hope is that once the movement towards statehood is announced, and once you begin to talk about elections, then I think mainstream politics will also then channelize itself. At this moment, there's no channel. What do? Mainstream politics is also about workers, and workers need to be occupied in some degree of political activity on a daily basis. I remember Mufti Saab would call up his workers all the time. You have to keep them motivated. There has to be a cause. There has to be an action brought out. So if you say elections are happening now, let's just focus on the block level, on the tehsil level, on the district level, on the constituencies to start mobilizing support. Then there'll be all sorts of other democratic activities. The alliance building, what happens to the Gupkar alliance? Will Mehbooba and Farooq stick together? Where will Sajjad Lone go? Where will Altaf Bukhari go? Where will Ghulam Nabi Azad go? All this jockeying for positions will suddenly re-emerge. Obviously, within that also, there will be some who will, in the language of the market, you'll need some degree of product differentiation. If you're going to be all clubbed by your opposition to 370, then why choose anyone? So
Right.
they will now need to differentiate amongst themselves. I say, so this will take time, but I think once that process begins, everyone should be allowed to go out and have rallies and public meetings. The biggest danger, however, is if Pakistan is going to play spoiler. So you cannot not ever let your guard down on the border, and you have to prevent infiltration, and you have to prevent Pakistan from trying to use this opportunity to try and create disaffection again. I must say the National Security Advisor and has been effective in doing that through his back channels as well. But if at any moment there was a need for a stronger back channel, a stronger track two, and this is not a self-serving argument just because I've been part of the track twos in the past, but generally speaking, now is the time to reach out to Pakistan and say, hey, here is this opportunity. Let's now just bring this to a closure. After 71, after Shimla, this is one other opportunity. Let's not lose it again.
In a sense,
Shimla,
the judgment, the verdict of the Supreme Court really also, says the same thing that Pakistan has been saying: restore statehood. So Pakistan should have no problem accepting the new situation, isn't it?
if that is the bottom line of Pakistan, I'd say it is a win-win for everyone. India wants to restore statehood. Kashmiris want it. If it's acceptable to Pakistan, it's a win-win on all three sides. If
but
that's
is,
what if that's your interlocutors in Pakistan is saying it, I'll say, be my guest. If that is all you want, we should mobilize public opinion in India to ensure the fast restoration of statehood in Jammu and Kashmir. But if you're going to betray us like Zulfikar Ali Bhutto betrayed us in 72 in Shimla, promise something secretly that he'll accept the ceasefire line or the LOC as the international border, then reneged on that understanding after he went away, uh, then it's not going to be business as usual. If you're just trying to buy time, then all bets are off. Because what Pakistan does is let its tactics outweigh the strategic outcomes that it wants. And that's a very dangerous policy to follow.
it's often said that there is never a best time for Pakistan and India to engage in talks, and there is a great amount of instability, political instability in Pakistan, even with this caretaker government that is backed by the army. And elections may or may not be held, and there's an upcoming election in India as well, parliamentary election in 2024. So, do you think that on both sides there will be some kind of willingness to engage on this question
Look,
of and do you think it's actually necessary, because the government in India keeps saying that there's nothing to talk to Pakistan about?
the thing is that you either follow a policy of unilateralism, which has worked and can work. I mean, you have had the Supreme Court now conclusively saying 370 was temporary and transitional, and its abrogation is legally and constitutionally justified. So we can follow that path. I am a person who likes to bring in all the stakeholders into a process which can work for every one of them. Look, it's after these elections, it's clear that unless there is a sudden change in electoral fortunes and in Indian democracy, if anything can happen, but the present dispensation will come back to power. Uh, in
That's a
Pakistan, I'm
prediction.
told you know Pakistan better than I guess anyone in India. Even the people who are within the agencies who should be, as I hope they are, constantly consulting with you to seek your advice and information. But if they aren't, then I think it's their problem. But if that, you know that a combination of, say, Nawaz and the army, a businessman, and the people who bear the brunt of enmity with Pakistan, with India, if you have a coalition which is supportive of, if not a kind of jappi with India, but at least status quo, near normal with India, now is the time. So, if that is possible, if through the back channel, and the good thing about Ajit Doval's back channel was it wasn't involving all the civilian crowd more than a certain extent. It was dealing with Bajwa and his ISI chief and others. And Imran was, of course, kept occupied, but people like Moeed or, kids on the track two circuit who were brought in just to look good for the American establishment, they were kept away. That's what we should be doing, speaking to the core of the Pakistani establishment. And Nawaz, as the businessman, the pragmatic businessman, is a deal maker. That's in his genes. And this is the last, I think, the last chance he has to go down in history as more than just a businessman.
I just want to come back to the elections that the court has said should be held in Jammu and Kashmir. There was at times the politicians in Jammu and Kashmir, whether it's the Abdullahs or others, who have said that they would boycott elections, that they do not want to participate in any elections. So is that going to be a wise thing to do if they actually hold on to that position?
I don't think they will hold on to that. That was grandstanding again. And now that the Supreme Court judgment has come, which other door are you going to knock on? So that was, as I said, journalists and often also read too much in first statements. Journalism is the first draft of history, but you shouldn't become the first draft of the first voice expressing itself. Give it time. Each one of them, I'm completely convinced, will fight elections. I don't know who would not agree to fight elections unless they think that they're going to be completely trounced. From what I sense is that it's not clear who will win the elections or who will have the numbers necessary. Contrary to most people's expectations, the King's parties, as they were, don't seem to be doing too well. Now, you can read who the King's parties are, since we are a Republican state, but it could well be that some of the parties that we thought were old and gone and based on dynasties might do better than most people expected them. Having said that, I think what is clear is that all these mainstream parties will join an election before September. And if statehood is also going to be restored, one of them will be chief minister. And the first question you will ask that chief minister on the 1st of October or thereabouts is, you had said that you're deeply disappointed by the Supreme Court, that you're going to boycott elections. How come you have participated in elections, you have won them, and now you're sitting in a seat of power? And he'll say what Mufti Saab always used to tell me, VP Singh told him, politics, he said, Amitabh, is the art of the possible.
On that note, thank you very much, Professor Amitabh Mattoo, for your valuable time and your insights. Thanks a lot to all the viewers who have been watching this program. If you like it, please press the subscribe button on Awaaz South Asia YouTube channel and also follow us on awazsouthasia.com.